So we are going to kind of review some more ways of making patterns. So we can bring some of these guys out. I'll grab some of the easier ones. So after arranging these into some sort of reasonable shape, and maybe they're even overlapping, and maybe I'm going to design a ditzy, so I'm making these very small. One more. So I want to make it small and tightly packed, right? We can, after getting these into kind of a shape that I like, and I'm not even going to bother too much throwing a background on them, and this is a very informal way of designing. We can select them all and go to Edit, Define Pattern. I'm sorry, Object Pattern Make. I get confused between Photoshop and Illustrator. And we see it in here, and it doesn't have a background. It's completely transparent. But what we can do is over in width and height, because right now we have all of these gaps in the spaces, is we can rotate these smaller, and we can use this as like a preview for how our overlap would work. Right, so I can adjust these. There's lots of problems with designing this way. It's why we don't design in here most of the time. It's better to design outside of this pattern design world, because the amount of pixels that it's trying to generate, not pixels, but points, anchor points, is pretty overwhelming. So you can lower the number of copies, right? Right now it's on 5x5 and it's moving a little slow. If we lower it to 3x3, we get a better, it'll probably move faster, and then you can even lower it to 1x1. So doing this and then making note of the size of the tile that gets us to the pattern that we like, even though we've moved these around in here, we can now bring them outside of pattern design. So we don't have to keep working in here. So I like this orientation, and I'm going to also make a note of 181 and 230. 181 and 230. And this is the way also that sometimes if you guys have lost your original tile that you've defined, I get it back this way, where we can just hit Command All and select, because we can only manipulate this center tile while we're working in here, right? Can do Command All and then copy and choose done, and it'll save that repeat. But now out here we can choose Command Paste, and if we make a rectangle, that's 181 points by 230 points. We can then start doing our more traditional kind of clipping so that we can make our repeat, right, our tile, so that we could then bring it into Photoshop or bring it into Illustrator. Arrange, send to back, right, and then we could clip this, select it all, right, and choose window pathfinder and divide, and then we can move our pieces over from one side to the other. And since we know exactly how many pixels, we can do right click, transform, move, and send it directly 181 pixels to the left. But you guys know how to do that. That's that guy, and then we would end up defining it as a pattern again to get a pattern with the background on it. And of course, there's like a million other ways I could show you to do that exact same thing. If we wanted to do that on one of these larger scale ones, like let's say we want to grab some of these guys and make them into the 12-inch wide one or the 24-inch wide one. We can do that really easily in pattern design as well. We could draw the rectangle out here, click height 12, or sorry, the height can be anything, but the width has to be 12 inches. Oops, made it in points. We can do that same thing in pattern design. So let's say I just define these guys again. I'll make them larger. It's easiest to do once you've got something on the in like a shape that you like. Right, so we can kind of arrange these in a nice way. Maybe this one has a lot more space in it. Maybe we only use a handful of these guys. But once we have them kind of strewn about in a way that we think might work well, I can grab them all, and I can always do this kind of thing where I drag and click and then hold shift and click on something I don't want selected. So maybe I don't want the background in this. I can select it and then go to object, pattern, make, and we can tell pattern options over here again that the width should be 12 inches. Type in inches, and it helps a lot. And then we can adjust the height, kind of willy-nilly. We can kind of see how it feels as we bring these in tighter together. And we can move ones that don't fit anymore. So this is a lot more of a freeing way to design, but if you're working on a computer that is not very powerful, it really will run quite slowly. And even if you're working on a super powerful computer like my laptop, having a million anchors in there is going to make it run slowly, because for every flower, all of the hundreds of anchors on this flower, it's reinterpreting those 3 times over or 9 times over. Okay, So it is just an option. And then I have it here and I could make a note of these pixels. Maybe I even want to try it out in a half drop or a brick, and I want to test them first and see how it looks without deciding like one way or the other yet, right? We could really kind of get it, like play with it for a while, really sit in it. And make a note of these 864 by 683. And choose done, and then, oops, we want to copy it first. And I can always get back to a pattern that I just edited by double clicking on its swatch, right? And I'll copy, and I can do command paste and draw a rectangle of this size. And it's filling with the pattern, which brings up a good point. A rectangle filled with that pattern of that size, right? This background, we would go and clip it to the half drop or whichever we were making. But if we fill this rectangle, which is the correct size of the tile for this pattern, with our shape, then this is actually a tiling pattern. Like we can see it goes off there and comes off over here, and this is a half drop, so this one leaves the page there and comes off over there. So potentially we could just grab the artboard tool and click on this rectangle and then export that guy, and that could be our repeat. This also has some problems. You can end up losing pixels in there, and it's not as finite as this guy. So it also doesn't help you understand the structure of your repeat at all. But that is an option. And you could always, copy and paste in place and throw a color on that. And since it's transparent, if we arrange send to back, we could export this guy too. So there's lots of different ways to export your single tiles. Okay.
So because we're making single tiles this week, like, do we have to print them? Like, I'm confused.
No, these are just how you would isolate them to bring them over to Photoshop, to put your pattern on them. You're still making repeat patterns. Sorry. It's just important to know how to get them to be this individual tile, because this is also the tile that you would potentially upload onto Spoonflower to get patterns printed there.
Yeah, that wasn't just like confused, it was just like the whole 12-inch, 24-inch thing.
So it's just that the scale of your repeat has to be 12 inches wide, but you're still going to print it then in repeat. So this is a little bit hard because our 11 by 17 paper, right? If we make 11 by 17 rectangle, 11 inches by 17 inches. If we fill this with the pattern that we just made, which is 12 inches wide, it doesn't show the whole pattern. So this is getting down to our root cause for why we need to know how to scale patterns, which is the next thing that I wanted to review, right? So this would be one artboard. And then we would make another artboard and another rectangle with this at a smaller scale, so that we would be able to see the actual repeat, even though we know that this is at the 24-inch. So this is at scale, right? And then this guy we can do transform scale, and we just want transform patterns checked, and we don't want transform objects checked. That's key. And then we can scale it down. so we can really get a feel for the repeat and how the repeat looks. And when we get to these large repeats, these two, this 12-inch, this 24-inch, and then next week is your really big print. It's called something like really big digital print. It's going to be super important that we show both the scales, so I can't stress this enough. The 24-inch wide one, you're going to be able to have, there's like lots of space for either really big, really big motifs or a lot of detail in your print. Like you could fill it with tons of different motifs or different arrangements of motifs in order to really move the eye through it, you know? So there's lots of freedom there. Yeah, one of your prints also has to be non-directional, to go back to Moodle for just a second. So Ditzy 12-inch tile and 24-inch tile. So one of them should also be able to be viewed as a tossed, right? So from all directions, not just like a one-directional design. Okay. We have been discussing I've maybe forgotten to review this or stress this enough, but let's say we made a really, our 12-inch print. Let's do all three prints right now in this little demo with these same motifs. I'm gonna grab these guys and object pattern make, and I am going to tell this that it has to be 24 inches wide. Oh shoot. This can be smaller. So I can scale these guys way up if I like. Something that's important to note too, if we were designing in this pattern, is that it doesn't like it when your motifs aren't touching the blue box. So if you note this center blue box that defines the pattern that I can edit, if we move it outside of the blue box, this motif disappears on the other ones. So touching the box and it's visible in all the repeats, move it outside and it's gone. So you have to kind of develop ways that your motifs are always touching the box. You can't like move it too far out of the way. So we have this pattern and maybe we like it fine, and these are pretty big, these motifs. So I'm gonna copy and paste these guys again. And again, I would have taken the time to get a background on these. But anyway, let's throw this new guy on them. So these, this pattern, it looks okay. It is showing the motif. God, I hate this stripe. So I'm actually now seeing it in this small scale, going to double click because there's this like stripiness going on to it. I'm going to double click on this swatch and I can just directly adjust these in here because I haven't made it into a final pattern yet. Like I haven't developed the final croquis from it. But there we go, and it automatically updates it in here. It spreads it out. These look fine, but maybe these aren't my favorite daisies, or maybe my scale of my print is even bigger and it's only showing like one corner of the motif that I'm using, and I want to show it dead center in the screen, right? We've probably experienced this, maybe. We can adjust these in a variety of ways. So if we right click on this, we're familiar with going to transform scale, but we can also go to transform move. Oh, I had the wrong one selected. So this guy, right click, transform, move. And if I uncheck transform objects, it just moves the pattern, right? So I can click and scroll into these dialog boxes and get like the particular part. Maybe I really want to show this double stemmed one. I can show the particular part of the pattern that I like. I can also, although this, we don't use it that much for portfolios, for just displaying these flat prints, but I can use any of these. So let's just demonstrate on this guy. Right click, transform. I can also choose rotate, and I can rotate the pattern in here, right? With transform objects unchecked and transform patterns being the only one checked. So we can do all sorts of transformation rotations, and we can mirror it. We can shear it, which means like stretch it sideways a little bit. But that all becomes a lot more useful when you're making actual flats in Illustrator and illustrations for your fashion designs. So, okay. We're a little bit early for break, but I think that's okay. We can end there.